Hello everyone and welcome. We're going to be covering a few pieces of different cut content, features, dungeons, bosses, items, and other concepts from each Zelda game. As you'll see, a lot of the games could have been completely different and nothing like the final version, while others only have very little that is known. If you're a fan of videos like this, or want us to go more in depth on a specific game, let us know. Our next videos will be like this, but covering the best theories from each Zelda game, and then major localization changes or regional differences between versions of the games. So please, comment below and let us know your favorite Zelda theory or cut content, and we will give you a shout out if we use it in a video. Let's get started. 1. The Legend of Zelda, or the Hyrule Fantasy. Originally released on the Famicom Disk System, one of the biggest changes Nintendo's plans for the Hyrule Fantasy would have been more sci-fi focused. Instead of a magical Triforce, Link would be finding computer chips to travel back and forth through time, with the hero being the link between the past and the future, hence the name Link. The story was ultimately changed to a more medieval setting, but time travel elements would come back and be a huge part of the series. Link would finally be a link for two different worlds, with a link to the past's Hyrule and Dark World. Ocarina of Time would have the original idea finally realized, with Link finally being the link between the past and the future. 2. Adventure of Link. Sadly, not much is known about cut content from this game. We have some unused areas and graphics for Windows, but that's about it. Most changes come from regional differences or localization, so we will try to cover more on a video detailing major localization differences of each Zelda game. 3. A Link to the Past. We have a video going really in depth on this, but the quick version is Nintendo originally had Zelda 3 with a focus on 3 main characters, a warrior, a magic user, and a fairy. And yes, it was supposed to be multiplayer. In the interview, Miyamoto gives more details on the game and says it was ready to release, but they were waiting until Dragon Quest's release window was over. This way, major games aren't competing at the same time. A Link to the Past would finally release the next year, and when it did, it was completely different than Miyamoto described. One playable character, Link, and it provided the formula which the rest of the series was based on. 4. Link's Awakening. This began as a fun way for some of the developers to just goof off. After being impressed, Miyamoto had the team finish it as a real Zelda game. This is why the game has so many characters from other games that do not appear in future Zelda games, like Mario and Chain Chomp. While it mostly has a lot of smaller cut content, an earlier version of the fishing game, The Old Man, several of these enemies and rooms were left out of the final game. 5. Ocarina of Time. We have probably made more videos talking about cut content for Ocarina of Time than any other Zelda game. Since it was originally meant for the 64 disk drive, moved to the Nintendo 64, with extra content to release on the disk drive, Ura Zelda, the disc expansion, eventually had so much content added, it went from 1 disc to 2 discs. Each of these phases would have been a completely different game than what Ocarina of Time ended up as. Some versions had no child Link, no horse, took place entirely in a castle, and many other things. One of the disc expansions with remixed dungeons, a boss rush mode, and several other smaller changes would become the idea for Master Quest. All of the major additions, new items, locations, dungeons, stories, characters, and everything else that fans are usually talking about when talking about Zelda Ura would be meant for the second 64 disk drive expansion. It would be the foundation for Zelda Gaiden, or what became Majora's Mask. Even more leftover content and ideas would even go on to be used in later games. Interviews with Miyamoto and Aonuma mention some ideas used in Twilight Princess, and Aonuma mentions Breath of the Wild using ideas he first came up with 20 years prior, which would have been when he was working on Ocarina of Time. 6. Majora's Mask. As we mentioned, Majora's Mask used a lot of concepts and ideas meant for Ocarina of Time's expansion, but it still had many of its own changes. Most people already know it was meant to be a full week, not just 3 days. Nintendo didn't want to have Link's adult model from Ocarina of Time go unused, but with only 3-day time travel, it wouldn't make sense to become adult Link, so they had the idea to use him as a mask transformation. This was eventually changed to the Fierce Deity mask, but it makes me wonder what kind of abilities or puzzles adult Link would have been used for, or if it was always planned as an in-game bonus like its Fierce Deity counterpart. 7. Oracle of Seasons. Both Oracle games are very closely linked with development, but they still have their own unique cut content. Oracle of Seasons was about half finished when the decision was made to scale back to just 2 games. The cancelled third game had a lot of its ideas combined with Oracle of Seasons, as the Rod of the Four Seasons was meant to be Mystical Seed of Courage's special item, but when it was cancelled, became used in Seasons. It all gets a bit confusing, but essentially Oracle of Seasons is more of a mix of ideas they had for Mystical Seed of Courage and Mystical Seed of Wisdom. 8. Oracle of Ages. Similarly, Oracle of Ages is a fusion of 2 games as well. Before Capcom even thought of making the Oracle games, they were only focusing on a Game Boy remake of the original Zelda. It was in the middle of its development that the decision was made to make entirely new games. However, they would go on to reuse a lot of the assets for the remake as the foundation of Oracle of Ages. This is why the overworld, bosses, and more are so similar if not identical to the original Zelda game. Here is the original story given, which focuses a lot more on Zelda and Ganondorf. We even have this artwork where he looks a bit like a vampire. Princess Zelda, responsible for managing the 4 seasons of the land of Hyrule and the Triforce of Power, has been kidnapped by Ganon. The brave hero Link learns of this and sets out to save the princess. However, Ganon learns of Link's quest and splits the Triforce into 8 pieces, scattering them throughout the land. In addition, the Rod of the Four Seasons, a device that controls the seasons, along with its hiding place in Hyrule Castle, have flown to another dimension. 9. Wind Waker. We also have a great video going in depth on Wind Waker, but some of our favorites are the faster sailcloth, which actually ended up being used in the remake, though it originally had 2 upgrades, not just 1. The iron boots, which are still equipable if the game is hacked, and an entire island with its own side quests, dungeons, and more, which was already complete and in the game, but removed for pacing issues. Now it is just the remains of Great Fish Isle. Nintendo has also stated at least 3 other dungeons were scrapped to become mini-dungeons, like the Fire and Ice Islands. 10. Minish Cap. Another Zelda game created by Capcom. It has a lot of smaller cut content such as the Fire Rod, which Wizrobes are said to be weak against, an unused sword, gold and purple dark nuts, and more. But most interesting is what may have been a full dungeon, as Big Goron's dungeon is also found in the code, though it is thought this dungeon ended up becoming Goron's cave, as they both would lead to the Big Goron. 12. Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures. These are grouped together because sadly we don't really know of anything really big that was cut. Some music, text, and the usual, but Tetra's Treasure Tracker was removed from versions of the game outside of Japan, which was a great minigame that also featured voice acting for Tetra, but we can get more into it on one of our upcoming videos. 13. Twilight Princess. As Twilight Princess went through multiple phases similar to Ocarina of Time, it also has a lot of cut content. It first began as Wind Waker 2, which included adult Toon Link with Toon Epona, and taking place mostly on land. Then it was shortly another Hero of Time sequel before Twilight Princess. It originally had a magic meter, Sheik made an appearance, and a lot more. For almost everything known about its cut content, you can check out one of these videos. 14. Phantom Hourglass. Phantom Hourglass had 6 special fairy doors which related to the dungeons, a moon door which was unlocked with the moon key, which is believed to be a second version of the sun door, and sun key, which is needed to get to Melita Island. There are also models of a steamer boat, a new ghost character, and a windmill are also found in the game code. 15. Spirit Tracks. Spirit Tracks is way more interesting than Phantom Hourglass. A full dungeon and station platform located in the Dark Realm was cut, a full 3D model of the Temple of the Ocean King, and a few different versions of Hyrule Town are also found in the code. 16. Skyward Sword. Another Zelda game which began completely differently, shortly beginning as Twilight Princess 2, though not much is known about this phase, aside from a few interviews mentioning it was cancelled to quickly release Link's crossbow training in the short term, and what became Skyward Sword in the long term. We see a lot of stuff that went unused, but the most interesting are these ideas and concepts from Hyrule Historia, mostly different versions of characters, entirely different races, as well as ideas for other islands in the sky, which hopefully will be brought back in Breath of the Wild 2. 17. A Link Between Worlds. For the Nintendo 3DS, Aonuma wanted to create a brand new Zelda game, while Miyamoto wanted to remake A Link to the Past. They compromised, and we ended up with a new Zelda game with a new story and new gameplay mechanics, but using the overworld and characters of A Link to the Past. We don't really know what ideas or concepts Aonuma would have had with his new Zelda game, but this reimagining mostly has these locations that were different or completely removed from the game. 18. Triforce Heroes. Though not confirmed, some believe the puzzles and dungeons used in Triforce Heroes came about from Aonuma's ideas for the original Zelda game he had planned. All we know that is confirmed is this fairy costume for Link, unused emotes, and little to nothing else. 19. Breath of the Wild. We have many videos and top 10 lists that cover almost everything about this game. Everything from these aliens attacking Link and Hyrule, what was meant to be a multiplayer option of the game, completely different concepts for the divine beasts or bosses that look more like nightmares. It would have had a magic meter and dozens and dozens of other amazing things, such as the entire game being built around using the Wii U gamepad as a second screen, and even incorporating it as a weapon, like with this beetle. Also, a lot of stuff that we see in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailers actually came from the original idea for the first Breath of the Wild, such as floating islands, Ganondorf returning, Link's arm having different powers or abilities. You can check any of these videos out for everything we know about it. Thank you all so much for watching our videos. We have a few giveaways coming up soon as a way to thank those of you who have subscribed and commented. And those of you who have purchased a shirt or have supported us on Patreon are the reasons we are able to continue making videos like this. Please, don't worry if you can't become a Patreon supporter. Only do it if you can afford to. As for shirts, we will be giving some away as part of the giveaway, along with Nintendo eShop cards. The next giveaway will be at 105,000 subscribers, so almost there. We used to be sent a lot of fan art and custom designs that we would feature on videos, and we're going to bring that back. So if you have any Highland Games Cast, Capt Bergerson, 𝐓𝐷𝐢𝐿, The Geek Apprentice, or Game Over Jesse artwork or designs that you would like to have shown off, send them to us on Twitter or Instagram, and we will promote it and you at the end of each of our videos. That's it for now. I hope you're all doing well, and have a great day.